Winter in Wyoming's Grand Teton National Park was unforgiving. The snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly, bathed in the cold, fading light of a January afternoon. The wind howled through the towering pines, rattling the bare branches like an omen. It was minor, far and neat, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, that turned breath into ice before it left your lips. Ethan Walker, a veteran ranger, adjusted his gloves and squinted into the endless white. He had patrolled these mountains for 15 years, witnessing both their beauty and their brutality. Today felt different. Something gnawed at his gut, an instinct he had learned never to ignore. Then he saw it. A single drop of blood, stark and vivid against the untouched snow. Then another. And another. A trail of crimson leading deeper into the timberline. Ethan's breath quickened. Blood in the snow was never a good sign. It could mean a wounded elk, a predator's kill, or something else entirely. His pulse pounded in his ears as he followed the trail, each step crunching beneath his heavy boots. Then a sound, faint, fragile, almost swallowed by the wind. A whimper. Ethan froze, his senses sharpening. His hand instinctively moved to his radio, but he didn't call for backup. Some things you had to face alone. He stepped forward, pushing through a tangle of frost-covered underbrush, and then he saw it. Curled in the snow, no bigger than a bundle of ruffled fur and fading hope, lay a tiny bear cub. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The cub's frail body trembled uncontrollably, its tiny paws twitching, its fur stiff with frost. Deep gashes lined its ribs, fresh wounds from an attack. A predator had tried to take it, but somehow it had escaped. But the worst wound wasn't on its body. It was in its eyes, wide, glazed with pain, locked onto Ethan with a silent, heartbreaking plea. A plea for help. For the first time in his career, Ethan hesitated. Not as a ranger, but as a man standing on the edge of a choice that would change everything. Ethan knew the rules. Never interfere with wildlife. Never take an animal from its natural habitat. But as he knelt beside the shivering bear cub, those rules felt meaningless. The cub's breath was shallow, barely visible against the freezing air. Its body was so dangerously cold that when Ethan touched its fur, it felt like ice beneath his fingertips. The deep gashes along its ribs, likely from a predator attack, had stopped bleeding, a sign that its body was shutting down. Ethan clenched his jaw. If he left it here, it wouldn't survive the next hour. There was no time to think. Stripping off his thick ranger coat, Ethan carefully wrapped the cub, pulling it close to his chest. He could feel how light it was, nothing more than skin, bones, and fading warmth. The wind howled through the trees, but the only sound that mattered was the weak, ragged breath of the tiny creature in his arms. A desperate run for survival. The storm was getting worse. Snow swirled violently, cutting through visibility like a white curtain of death. Ethan plowed through knee-deep snow, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. His truck was half a mile away, parked on a remote fire road. Too far, too slow. Ethan pushed forward. The weight of the cub was barely noticeable, but the urgency of its life pressed heavy on his shoulders. Step after step he fought against the brutal cold, his boots sinking into the snow with every stride. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, his lungs burned from the freezing air, but he didn't stop. Then the cub let out a faint, wheezing whimper, a sound so weak it barely reached Ethan's ears. "No, stay with me." Adrenaline surged through him, pushing him faster. The tree line broke suddenly, revealing his truck, a silver beacon in the storm. With the last ounce of strength, he lunged forward, yanked open the door, and climbed inside. Heat. He needed heat. He placed the cub on the passenger seat and blasted the heater, cranking it as high as it would go. The vents blew hot air, but the truck itself felt like an icebox. The freezing temperatures had turned the interior into a metal coffin. Ethan grabbed the emergency thermal blanket from the back seat and wrapped the cub tighter. his fingers numb as he checked for signs of life. The cub didn't move. He pressed 2 fingers to its tiny chest. A heartbeat. Faint, slow, but still there. Ethan gritted his teeth and slammed the truck into gear. The road was a slick, winding nightmare, ice patches lurking beneath the fresh snow. His tires skidded as he made the first sharp turn, but he didn't slow down. Every second counted. The Jackson Wildlife Rescue Center was over an hour away. In these conditions, maybe more. The cub didn't have an hour. Glancing at the bundle on the seat beside him, Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. "Hold on, little one," he whispered. "Just hold on." The cub didn't respond. Its breathing had become too shallow to see. Ethan pressed harder on the accelerator, praying he wasn't already too late. Ethan barely remembered the drive to Jackson Wildlife Rescue Center. Ice-slicked roads, blinding snow, tires skidding dangerously close to the edge of cliffs. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the fragile bundle of fur and fading breath lying on the passenger seat beside him. By the time he screeched to a stop in front of the center, his hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the terrifying possibility that he was already too late. "I need help," Ethan's voice echoed as he pushed through the double doors, cradling the unmoving cub against his chest. Dr. Olivia Park, the lead veterinarian, rushed forward, her sharp gaze scanning the situation in an instant. "Get him to the exam table, now!" Ethan laid the cub down gently, stepping back as the team sprang into action. Machines beeped, gloved hands moved swiftly, voices clipped and urgent. Temperature dangerously low. Heart rate unstable. Signs of infection spreading. Ethan clenched his fists. The room was suffocating with tension, the air thick with the kind of urgency he had only felt in life or math moments. Then, a moment of silence. Olivia looked up, her face unreadable. "Ethan?" "He's in critical condition, but we've got a chance. It's going to be a fight." Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. A chance was all they needed. 72 hours between life and death. The next 3 days were an exhausting battle. IV fluids, oxygen support, heat therapy. The team worked in shifts, pushing against the limits of both science and faith. Kodiak, that's what they named him after Wyoming's great Kodiak bears. Teetered on the edge of life and death. His body trembled under layers of blankets, fighting off hypothermia. His lungs wheezed with every tiny breath, battling the pneumonia that threatened to take hold. His heartbeat was weak, erratic, as if unsure whether to keep going. And through it all, Ethan never left his side. His ranger duties were reassigned. Nothing else mattered. During the quietest hours of the night, when the only sounds were the steady hum of machines and the occasional shuffle of exhausted veterinarians, Ethan talked to him. He spoke softly, telling the cub about the mountains where he had been found, the rivers he would one day roam, the stars that hung above them both. "You fought so hard to survive out there, little one," Ethan whispered one night, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Just fight a little longer." A miracle in the making. On the 4th day, when exhaustion had carved deep lines into the faces of every staff member at the center, it happened. A soft whimper. Ethan's head snapped up. He barely dared to breathe. Then 2 weary, unfocused eyes fluttered open. Not lost, not empty. They locked onto Ethan. And then, in a sound so faint it barely stirred the air, Kodi made a small, weak huff. It was the sound of a bear greeting someone it recognized. A sound that made every hour of the fight worth it. Dr. Olivia called it a miracle. Ethan called it the beginning of something extraordinary. Kodi had beaten the odds. He had survived hypothermia, infection, and starvation, and now, with each passing day, his strength returned. His once frail frame filled out with muscle. His fur thickened into a glossy coat, and his sharp amber eyes grew more alert. But surviving in captivity was one thing. surviving in the wild was another. Ethan knew it, and so did Dr. Olivia Park. "Is bonded with you, Ethan," she said one morning as they stood outside Kodi's enclosure. "More than any bear we've ever rehabilitated. That's a problem." Ethan didn't need to be told. He saw it every day. Most rescued bears feared humans. They kept their distance, avoided eye contact, and resisted human presence. But Kodi was different. He recognized Ethan. When Ethan spoke, Kodi perked his ears. When he walked past the enclosure, Kodi followed with his gaze. On more than one occasion, he had even huffed softly in greeting, a sound young bears typically reserved for their mothers. It was unlike anything the center had seen before, and it was dangerous. Reintroducing the wild. If Kodi was going to return to the mountains, he had to unlearn his attachment to humans and relearn what it meant to be a bear. The Rehabilitation Center developed a strict training program to reinforce his natural instincts. Foraging challenges. Instead of being fed, food was now hidden inside logs, buried beneath leaves, or scattered across the enclosure, forcing Kodi to search and work for his meals. Live prey introduction. A small, controlled pond was added to his habitat, stocked with live fish. At first, Kodi watched them curiously, but soon he began to swipe at the water, instinct kicking in. Climbing and strength training, trees and climbing structures were added, encouraging him to build muscle and agility, both essential for survival. The staff also minimized human interaction, no petting, no talking, no unnecessary contact. It was a slow, deliberate process, and Kodi learned fast. He became an expert forager, uncovering hidden food with surprising intelligence. He mastered fishing, his swipes becoming stronger and more precise. He climbed effortlessly, moving through the enclosure with the confidence of a bear born in the wild. But one thing never changed. Every morning before the sun had fully risen, Ethan would find Kodi sitting by the enclosure fence, waiting. As if they shared a secret no one else could understand. Ethan didn't speak to him anymore, didn't acknowledge him, but they both knew the truth. Kodi wasn't just any bear. And when the time came for his release, letting go would be the hardest thing Ethan had ever done. Kodi was ready. At 3 years old, he had grown into a powerful 420-pound bear, his body rippling with strength, his instincts sharpened through months of careful rehabilitation. He could fish, forage, climb, and navigate his enclosure with ease. Everything about him screamed wild, untamed, free. But Ethan knew the truth. Kodi was still watching him. Even now, as the center finalized preparations for his release, Kodi sat near the enclosure fence, eyes locked on Ethan like he always had. Dr. Olivia Park stood beside Ethan, arms crossed, watching the bear. "He's ready," she said quietly. "But are you?" Ethan exhaled, his chest tight. "I don't think I'll ever be." Because deep down he wasn't just losing a bear, he was losing something more. A bond that defied logic. A connection that had grown from desperation into something unexplainable. But Kodi didn't belong here. And today it was time to say goodbye. The final journey. The release site was a remote stretch of wilderness deep in Grand Teton National Park, far from human settlements, abundant with food, shelter, and open space. A place Kodi could truly be free. The morning of the release was crisp and golden, the first hints of autumn painting the landscape. The transport team worked in silence, moving with the quiet understanding that this was more than just another release. But when it came time to load Kodi into the transport cage, a problem arose. Kodi refused to go in. He paced the enclosure, making soft, uncertain huffs. It was as if he knew something was different today, something final. Ethan took a step forward. The moment Kodi saw him, he stopped. For a long moment, the two just stared at each other. No words, no commands, just understanding. Then, with quiet trust, Kodi followed Ethan into the cage without hesitation. The transport team exchanged glances. They had never seen a bear do that before. One last goodbye. The 2-hour drive to the release site was silent. Ethan sat in the back of the truck, his hand resting against the cage, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke to Kodi one last time. "This is your home now, buddy. This is where you belong." Kodi watched him, his amber eyes unblinking. When they arrived, Ethan opened the cage door. Kodi stepped out, but didn't run. Instead, he turned, looking back at Ethan one final time. Then, in a move that sent a lump straight to Ethan's throat, Kodi stepped forward and pressed his massive head against Ethan's outstretched hand, just like he had the day they met. A silent thank you, a silent farewell. Then, without hesitation, Kodi turned and disappeared into the trees. Ethan stood there long after the last rustling leaf settled into silence. Kodi was gone, but Ethan knew some goodbyes aren't really goodbyes. 3 years had passed since Ethan had last seen Kodi disappear into the Wyoming wilderness. He had tried to let go, to accept that Kodi was where he belonged, but no matter how much time passed, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, was he still alive? Had he survived the brutal winters? Did he ever think of the man who had once saved him? Then, on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed. The call that changed everything. Ethan was at his ranger station when the call came in. A remote research station deep in Grand Teton National Park had been tracking a massive grizzly exhibiting unusual behavior. He circled the same areas repeatedly. He watched hikers from a distance but never showed aggression. He lingered near the places where humans occasionally passed, as if he was waiting for something. Ethan's pulse quickened as he listened. The research team had compiled weeks of footage trying to understand why this bear wasn't behaving like the others. When Ethan saw the grainy images, his breath caught in his throat. The bear was enormous, easily over 600 pounds now. But it wasn't just his size. It was the way he moved, the way he held his head. Something about him was achingly familiar. The research team needed an experienced ranger to assess the situation. Ethan volunteered immediately. Back to the beginning. The next morning, Ethan hiked into the wilderness, retracing the same steps he had taken years before. Dr. Olivia Park and a wildlife photographer accompanied him. The air was crisp, the forest a mosaic of gold and deep green, but Ethan barely noticed. His heart pounded with something between hope and fear. What if it wasn't Kodi? Worse, what if it was, and Kodi no longer remembered him? Hours passed. The forest was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of an eagle overhead. Then, at the edge of a clearing, a shadow moved. A massive grizzly stepped into the light. Ethan froze. The research team whispered frantically, cameras rolling, but Ethan couldn't hear them. The bear lifted his head, testing the wind, then let out a soft, familiar huff. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. Recognition beyond the wild. Without thinking, Ethan took a step forward. His voice, unsteady with emotion, broke the silence. "Hey, buddy, do you remember me?" Kodi didn't hesitate. With slow, deliberate steps, the massive bear closed the distance. The researchers instinctively backed away. But Ethan stood his ground. Then, in a moment that defied everything scientists thought they knew about wild bears, Kodi did the impossible. He lowered his head and pressed it gently against Ethan's outstretched hand, just like he had the day they said goodbye. Ethan felt the warmth of Kodi's breath, the familiar weight of his presence. A silent recognition, a bond that had never been broken. The cameras captured everything, and the world was about to witness something truly extraordinary. For a long moment, time stood still. Ethan barely breathed as Kodi pressed his massive head against his outstretched hand, just like he had years ago. It was impossible. A wild bear, fully grown, remembering the man who once saved him. The research team watched in stunned silence, their cameras rolling. They had spent years studying bear behavior, but nothing could have prepared them for this. Then, as calmly as he had come, Kodi stepped back. He lifted his head, looking at Ethan one last time before turning and disappearing into the trees. A story that moved millions. By nightfall, the footage had spread across the world. Wildlife experts debated the depth of animal memory and emotional bonds. News outlets covered the incredible reunion, and millions of people were moved to tears by the idea that a bear, who had spent years in the wild, still remembered the man who saved him. But beyond the science, beyond the headlines, the story carried something deeper. It reminded people that kindness leaves an imprint that never fades, that love, trust, and compassion transcend time, distance, and even species, that every small act of care can create a lasting impact, even in the wildest of places. Kodi's legacy. Kodi remained free, thriving in the wild, but now Grand Teton National Park designated his home as a protected zone, ensuring his safety for years to come. Ethan knew their paths might never cross again, but as he stood at the forest's edge, he smiled. Because some bonds, the ones built on trust and love, never truly break. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories of friendship, loyalty, and resilience. The story of Ethan and Kodiak is more than just an extraordinary wildlife encounter. It's a powerful reminder that kindness leaves an imprint that never fades. In life, we often cross paths with others, human or animal, without realizing the lasting effect we might have. A single act of compassion, a moment of care, can create a bond that endures, even across years and distance. Love, once given freely, is never truly lost. For many, aging brings a sense of reflection. We look back on the relationships that shaped us, the moments that mattered, the kindness we shared. And if Ethan's story teaches us anything, it's that those connections, built on trust, love, and care, never truly disappear. Whether with family, friends, or even nature itself, the love we give has the power to echo beyond time. So, let us continue to show compassion, to cherish the bonds we create, and to believe that what we give to the world, in one way or another, always finds its way back to us. Ethan and Kodi's story is a testament to the unbreakable bonds formed through compassion and trust. It reminds us that kindness leaves a lasting mark, even in the wildest of hearts. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories of friendship, loyalty, and resilience.